Hello and welcome to Full Disclosure, a podcast project conceived chiefly to let me spend more time than I'd ever get on the radio with interesting people. And I don't want to embarrass any previous guests on the programme, but I've really been looking forward to this one, even more than I look forward to all of the others. Midge Ure, welcome.
Thank you very much.
It's hard to know where to start. I presume you've been on a rock family tree. Have you? One of those pictures where they do all the lines and the links between? Because I thought I knew the bones of your career, but I mean, good Lord above, there's a lot there, isn't there?
There's a lot of lines, a lot of connections. It goes back a long way, though. That's possibly why. Yes. I think when they did the rock family tree, they ended up using an extra couple of pages.
We'll get on to some of that, but we'll begin in 1953 in Cambuslang. Have I pronounced that correctly?
You have, perfectly.
Near Glasgow. But I don't suppose the nickname came along immediately, but when you've described it in terms, the family home, it's sort of very happy but very simple.
Yeah, it was a tenement, kind of 4-5-story tenement block. We were on the ground floor, one bedroom, and my parents slept in the sitting room. My brother and I had the bedroom, and they in a thing called a cavity bed, which I'm not sure existed anywhere else. I had no idea. Which is basically a hole in the wall with shutters or a curtain on it with a mattress in there. And it was very basic, and I think if I look back at it, incredibly tough for my parents, I think. Yeah. When you're a kid, you don't know that stuff. You roll with it. Everyone I knew lived in a situation like that. So,
and so by the time your sister came along, there's 5 of you essentially in 2 and a bit room.
Yeah, my sister would be in with my parents, younger sister, and my brother and I sharing a bed which was horrendous. He used to tell me there was things in the wardrobe waiting to get me, and like brothers do.
But I sense that you were a very happy kid.
I was.
Until they made you go to school.
Well, that wasn't so good. Yeah, I knew my limitations even then, and school wasn't one of my highlights. It seemed to me a very happy place. My overriding memory, I suppose, is the build up to Christmas. The build up, because my birthday's in October, so as the Scottish nights got much longer, getting dark at 3:00 in the afternoon and stuff. The smell of paraffin heaters coming on. That smell, if I ever get a whiff of it now, instantly takes me back to that time, because it was warm and cozy, and and that's the only way you could stay warm. Icicles on the inside of the windows and stuff. It was quite good.
And was it? I mean, did everybody know everybody? And at the tenements, you'd know everybody in the same building, but also on the street. I mean, would the children run as a pack?
Yeah, you'd be out. It was in the days when you'd look out the tenement window, and all the old biddies, all the old women, and they knew you. They knew who everyone was. So if there were kids playing football or getting up to kicking a can up and down the street, because hardly any cars. You'd hear the scream of some old woman upstairs going, "I'm going to tell your dad when he gets home," So everyone behaved themselves. It was actually quite a good policing method.
You've said that you knew, and by the time you got to primary school, which you hated, we'll talk about that a bit, but you knew that you had an artistic bent already. What does that mean? How would that have manifested itself?
With a voice. We had a radio. Radio played a massive part in our life. I don't remember television so much back then. We must have had one, but I don't remember it being a big thing. But radio kind of permeated our lives. It was, back then it would be the light program or the home program or whatever it was, and they kind of played a bit of everything. A very Catholic taste in music. So you'd get, Mantovani, and then you'd get the Shadows, and you'd get, Nat King Cole, and then you'd get, maybe the beginning of the Beatles, because it was way before pop radio appeared. If you wanted to listen to pop radio, maybe later on in life, and you had a little transistor with an earpiece, yes, you could possibly tune into a very swishy sounding, Radio Luxembourg or whatever. But there you just took what you got. But it was always on, and my mother was always singing and stuff. And I had a voice. I found that I could sing. And that didn't cost anything. So it wasn't like they had to send me to music lessons. It was always there. So I had this musical ear.
Were mum and dad musical beyond singing along to? Was there any history of music in the family?
Not really. On my dad's side, his parents had a piano, and my grandmother on his side, and he used to kind of vamp out tunes, very Les Dawson, more wrong notes than right ones. And he used to kind of oddly, sometimes when we'd go over there on a Sunday afternoon, he'd vamp out these tunes. But whether he had a musical bent or not, I don't really think so. I'm not sure where mine came from. It was,
well, who clocked that it was a bit special then? Where did that sort of realisation kick in?
At school. The system up there would be they would teach you traditional Scottish tunes. You know,
Okay.
That's what you get from music. You weren't allowed to touch the piano. That's all we had there. So the teacher would play the piano and you'd sing, you know, "Step We Gaily, On We Go" or whatever. You know, some kind of Scottish lament, some Scottish tune. And I think it was pointed out that I had a very high kind of, you know, boy's voice, and there was a competition. They did a competition of singing Burns songs, and I won a certificate for the excellence of singing Burns songs. I sang "My Love Is Like a Red, Red Rose" in an octave that I couldn't even dream of hitting anymore, and that was it. They were the pointers that this was something, and also absolute fantasy inside my head. You know, dreams of guitars. I could draw a guitar before I ever touched one. You know,
so there's something there that's almost organic. Then there's no obvious reasons why these would have settled upon you, but you could feel them from quite an early age.
And I think it was the thing that you kind of entertained yourself. As I say, I don't remember too much about sitting in front of a TV all the time, but I remember lying on the carpet in front of the open fire with a drawing pad, a piece of paper, and just drawing and stuff. You know, as I said, I could figure out what a guitar looked like just having seen it, you know, on television or whatever when I was like 10. But I didn't get a guitar till I was 10.
And when you were performing the Red Red Rose, do you remember the audience? Do you remember the feeling of being in front of an audience? Or?
Yeah, between that and the Cubs. I mean, again, you know, being a Boy Scout or a Cub or whatever was a way of getting rid of you for a couple of hours for your parents, and it was free. You know, once you got the uniform, it was a great way of farming you out. Just like when they used to send us to, you know, Sunday school on a Sunday afternoon. We weren't religious at all.
It gets you out of the house.
But it gets you out of the house for a couple of hours, and they can go and do whatever they needed to go and do. So between singing, you know, "My Love Is Like a Red, Red Rose" and performing in, you know, gang shows or whatever when you're a kid, singing you know, Herman's Hermits tunes or whatever.
But you got a buzz. You remember the buzz.
I loved it.
More than the other kids.
I remember the feeling of just that moment where it just took you out of the crowd for just that split second. All of a sudden, they were looking at you.
So were you a bit of a show-off off stage, or I don't sense that you were a sort of look at me kind of kid?
No, I wasn't.
No.
I was a shy, retiring little thing.
Were you?
I had nothing to show off about. You know, I had zero.
That doesn't stop everybody.
I had zero skills. You know, and zero appeal to the opposite sex. I think so. Maybe the light in my eyes as I'm standing on the gang show stage and hearing that applause made me think that maybe this will appeal.
This
you know,
could
maybe
be for me.
if only I had a guitar.
Right, which happens when you're 10. Had you become Midge by now? Were you still James?
Oh no, that was much later.
Okay,
later.
Remind you to point out when that happened. So you're 10 years old. Family moves to a new house in Eastfield, and your dad scrapes together the cash to buy you your first guitar.
Yeah.
Had you been pestering him something rotten?
Dreadfully.
Right, constantly.
Every Christmas and birthday. But somewhere in the back of my mind, I knew it was never going to happen. You know, it was way outside our remit and his wages. My dad he drove a bakery van all his life and probably hated it all the time. But he did it to keep us, you know, alive and fed. Yeah. And he was paid £6 a week. And this guitar that they found through some distant relative was selling was £3. That's half your wages. That's a major commitment. Yeah. And of course, they would have known other people who had bought their kids guitars, and they usually buy the cheapest one they could get, which means the strings are so far away from the fretboard that it kills your fingers. Okay. So they end up standing in a corner somewhere. Yeah. Luckily, this guitar that we went to see was a good guitar. It was an old dance band guitar, and they got me that and a Bert Weedon playing.
So you went to see it.
They took me to wherever this was in the dark back streets of Glasgow somewhere, and showed me this guitar, and I just, I fell in love with it instantly without having touched it.
Sure,
it was a thing. It was what I'd been drawing, as I say. It was,
but it was real. It wasn't
real.
like you say, a sort of cheap knockoff version designed to keep a kid happy for 10 minutes.
Absolutely, it was a proper guitar,
the real deal. So had he done research? Had he kind of asked around, or
I don't know how they found it now. I can't actually recall how it was. It may have been someone through work, but as I say, it seemed to come from like a cousin or a second cousin or whatever. So maybe we got a bargain price.
A little bit of a bargain. But how did that feel then? Because I love the idea that you had simultaneously developed a deep desire for it, but also so that would be the emotion or the heart, but the head knew that it was never going to happen, and then it did.
Yeah, every Christmas from when I first saw the Beatles. So what would I be? I would be maybe 62 or something like that when the Beatles came out, something like that. So I'd plagued them for a guitar and some Chelsea boots. but I was still in short trousers, so the Chelsea boots would never have worked. The guitar, fortunately, I could get away with.
Stanley Matthews.
I would have looked at, but I now still wear Chelsea boots.
It's a lifelong love
I can buy
affair.
them anytime I like.
Love affair. All the Chelsea boots you can. And I'd love this idea that you knew somehow that this was for you. This was special. You're singing at school. You're singing with the Cubs. The guitar, you're not going to be loads of kids in your class who also want guitars. It's not like there's going to be, it's just somehow this had, and you're not even listening, apart from the Beatles who are just breaking through, you're just as likely to hear, uncool bands that your mum would like on the radio, and yet you knew somehow, somewhere that this was for you.
I had a weird sense of the ability to spot a good melody.
Yeah.
And I don't know, as I say, I don't know where it came from, but to me it didn't matter whether it was, Matt Monro singing or Frank Sinatra singing on the radio.
Okay.
I just heard these beautiful songs. Songs seemed to resonate with me. And the way that you would start being able to perform songs on your own is with an instrument, and the guitar probably came out of that. That plus the sound of guitars in the early 60s, these clean, haunting, the Shadows tunes, these beautiful, twangy, wonderful, atmospheric things. There's something about those that took you out of the reality that you had. And the reality I had was I was living in either a tenement or this new house in Eastfield, which had no central heating again, even though it was a new house. So this thing became a way of escaping, I suppose.
And now some of what happens much later begins to make more sense, because whether people know you from Ultravox or Visage or the work you did with Phil Lynott or your solo career, you've never been confined by genre at all. And in fact, some of the changes you made were surprising, perhaps, to people who only knew you from one bit of the career. But now that I've heard you describe this formative experience, you could find the music in anything.
I did. And, it's funny, for someone who, and I'm jumping a bit here,
yes,
for someone who had this ability to, when we were taught music at school, it was usually traditional music. Yeah. And of course, at that point, as my old mother said, my head was full of broken bottles. She could shake me and I'd rattle because I was a dreamer. I was a fantasist. So I would try and reject these beautiful tunes that they were teaching us until many years later, I worked with the Chieftains and they played one of my tunes on traditional instruments. And my God, it was so bloody Scottish. It was ridiculous. So those haunting melodies obviously came in and sat in there and festered and came out as something else. So yes, that ability to do it and the dream of being able to do it, I think, the fantasy of being able to do it was strong enough for me to stick with the guitar and carry on singing and doing whatever, even though the chance of having a life in music was so slim. It was ridiculously slim because everything music-oriented was London-centric, and I was a million miles away from London.
But it was there, this tiny, unlikely even irrational seed was there from a very early stage.
It was just like you can say to someone, you're never going to be able to fly.
Yeah.
Somewhere in the back of your childlike mind, you think that someday you will. It was that ridiculous.
That's lovely. And beyond the ability to sing, did anyone recognise the other stuff? Did anyone recognise the sort of melodic literacy, or once you got the Burt Weedon book and began to play the guitar, did you pick it up super quick? Did mum or dad or any teacher sort of think, aye, this lad's got something beyond?
The parents did.
They did.
They knew that I was, I sound like someone on one of these talent shows on television. They knew I was passionate about it. They knew. I mean, it's if I'd been forced to learn the accordion or something, it might have been a different story.
Right.
But this was something that I had found, that I had desired, that came from me and me alone. And they would see me and hear me playing records over and over and over again, in order to learn what the next chord was, to teach yourself the small faces tune or whatever.
Proper commitment, and they realise pretty quickly that this is not a fad.
Yeah,
that it's because every kid goes through bits of this and bits of, but this was like in your bones almost from a very early stage.
And I think they must have been surprised at where it came from, because they were as confused as everyone else.
And so you fail your 11 plus. Initially, stay on for another year in primary school. Why were you such a poor fit with school? Because your creative bent you could have got into English stories. There could have been things that you found a passion for. Was it partly because music enveloped you so much, or was there other stuff going on?
I think there was something around that period where it was never said, but there were decisions made. The smart kids, the really smart kids, maybe the 3 or 4 in your class of 30 or whatever, would go to university. If they were good enough, they would get to university. And everyone else was factory fodder. So your job was, you'll work in a shop, or you'll drive a van like your dad, or whatever. And if you're lucky, you might become a mechanic or an engineer or a plumber or an electrician or something, a trade. You would have a trade. And that would be a massive step up from what my father had.
Yeah.
So it was never encouraged. If you were a square peg in a round hole, which I seemed to be, no one ever said to me, look, if you just try a little harder on the academic side of things, you could maybe go to the Glasgow School of Art, which would have been a fantastic place. I'm a massive Macintosh fan, so I would have loved something like that. But it may have taken me off a bit like the sliding doors moments. It took me off on a completely different tangent, and I might never have been here talking to you as I am today.
So unless you were elite level academic,
that was the reality, though, wasn't it?
Yeah.
We got through that whole ridiculous thing where every tech college became a university, and everyone had to have a university degree in whatever it was, and that changed everything. So there was a divide, although it was never mentioned. So no one ever had a word in my ear and said, this is what you could do.
So there was nothing extraordinary about this. Your experience was the common one.
Yeah.
And rather than
exactly
having been left behind by everybody else.
That was the standard.
Got it.
That's what everyone got.
So you've said in the past that you weren't made to feel like an outsider. You were one. You said, I simply was one. In what way were you an outsider then, Midge?
I didn't fit because, I was the last guy to get picked for teams. Obviously, even though I got on well with everyone at school or whatever, I was an outsider because I wasn't interested in sport, and that was seen as something a bit soft.
You didn't think of faking it, or
I wasn't any good at it. I couldn't fake it well,
right?
And they knew it better than I did, hence being last chosen. So I knew instinctivly what my limitations were, and anything academic I just found. In a way, all my kids are all dyslexic or whatever, and I suppose I may have had an element of that, but that would never have been mentioned. Back then, if you couldn't spell, you were just a bit thick.
No one knew
just
a
bit silly.
Were you self-conscious? Were you?
I think I was. I'll tell you what I was. I was petrified of letting the family down, hence staying on
Yeah.
in primary school, which was seen as a humiliation.
Of course it was.
I chose to do that.
So you could have gone to the equivalent of the secondary model.
I could have gone to a regular
Yeah.
school, but I wanted to go to the academy that my older brother had gone to.
Okay.
Because I felt that would have been letting the family down hadn't I done that. And the only reason I got there was that I had a high IQ, they found out. But I had no capacity to, do anything with maths, or I wasn't even remotely interested in English. My education came later.
So you get to the academy, you don't, I sense, suddenly discover a great interest in the academic world.
Not really.
Not really.
I had my guitar, and the only way I could utilise the guitar when I got to secondary school was by joining the folk club.
Okay.
And I was not a folk singer. But you could sit and sing old blues tunes, and that they're classified as folk, worried man blues or something.
Yeah.
So you could sit and do that. What you did find in the folk club was someone else with a guitar. And
Was that the first time?
yeah, I think so. Yeah, realistically, you meet someone else who's got a guitar who's maybe there for the same reason you are.
Yeah.
And all of a sudden, there's two of you. You've got a mate with a guitar. That's half a band. You've got a sidekick. That's amazing. You've got someone else who's willing to spend 3 hours playing the same song over and over and over to try and figure out what the next chord is.
And that's what happened.
That's exactly what happened.
And so you leave school at 15. By now you're playing you're doing the Saturday morning picture shows.
Yeah.
So the dream, is it getting bigger? The plausibility, the likelihood that you're actually going to fly one day, has it grown a bit in your mind?
The idea is still there, and the belief that it might happen one day, but still mixed with the reality of it's almost impossible.
And were there any inspirations? Could you see precedents? Obviously, the Beatles had come from a very working class background, not massively dissimilar from yours, certainly by the time you get to Eastfield. Were you beginning to see paths to showbiz that were not London-based or not alien?
Pop music was, 90% working class.
Yeah.
That's where it stemmed from. It came from poverty. It came from the back streets. It came from, dirty and not having new shoes. That's what it was all about. The blues in America came from, oppression and all of that stuff. So it wasn't a million miles different. It wasn't that, far removed from what people had been living through, 100 years before.
Yeah.
I think seeing artists becoming successful, and I don't think it resonated really, because Scotland at the time, and it's an odd thing, we didn't have a pub rock circuit. We couldn't go and play in a pub because the church ran the licensing laws, so therefore they wouldn't let you charge money to enter a pub to go and be entertained. So we didn't have that. So what we ended up being at 15 or 16, when you'd play scout halls or church halls or whatever they happened to be on a Friday or Saturday night, you were the entertainment for everyone else. You were a human jukebox. You hadn't reached the point where you were skilled enough to write your own material. Anything you wrote was so derivative, it could have been someone else's tune completely. And you think, well, that's it. It doesn't go any higher than that. Maybe that's it. That is the dream.
Yeah.
And you work during the week as an engineer or whatever, like I became, to pay for it, to allow you to do it.
But so you're doing it for the love, really?
Absolutely.
You mentioned becoming an engineer. That's after Motherwell Technical College, and then the National Engineering Laboratory in East Kilbride. You mentioned earlier, with reference to your dad driving the bakery van, that would be a big step forward.
Massive step.
From mum and dad's point of view as well.
Absolutely.
And you'd made them proud at this point.
Yeah, we had the job of their dreams. Both my brother and I. My brother worked at the Rolls-Royce. He was an apprentice engineer. He was 2.5 years older than me. So for me to get a job at the NEL, the National Engineering Laboratories, was a big thing. To be an apprentice engineer and start on your £6 a week or whatever, which is what my dad was earning when he was driving a van.
Yes.
With a 4-year apprenticeship, and the idea that you could work in a overtime on a Tuesday and Thursday and a Saturday morning, and you would earn a good wage, and you could put a roof over your family's head and have a good life and a job for life, which doesn't
Crikey.
exist anymore.
No, it doesn't. What was it like? Did you like it?
No.
Not at all.
I found it interesting because I was quite good with my hands.
Okay.
And I found that side of it quite interesting. But as I said, my head was full of dreams. I was working, I was doing the band at weekends. I had long hair. I had to wear a hat with the hair nets, and I even had. We all had to wear dungarees, and I found some denim, big working men's dungarees. And I had my mum take them in so that I put them on like hippie dungarees, so they were flared. So I could still be, in my mind, cool and work at the same time.
So you've got it all going on. I mean, you've got a band up and running. You've got a very strong sense of aesthetics. Clearly, you know what you want to look like. You know what you want to be like. And so when you go along, I think the legend is that you were accompanying a friend to an audition.
Yeah.
For a band called Salvation, and yet somehow you ended up in it.
Yes, I'd been playing the Scottish circuit, all the Scottish bands at the time. The band who eventually became the sensational Alex Harvey band, a band called Tear Gas. They were one of the big bands in Scotland, and they were doing the circuit as we were, but we weren't doing it quite at the same level. And I went to this audition with a keyboard player who was in the band I was in at the time, my weekend band. And we didn't like the keyboard player very much. He was all right, but he was the wrong character for the wrong fit.
Yeah.
And he came in saying he wanted to go for this audition. And I went with him. And of course, the guys who ran the band he was auditioning for recognised me, and they were looking for a guitarist. And they asked me if I would play guitar while they auditioned him. And the obvious thing is that he didn't get the job, and they offered me the job as guitarist. And I was only 2 years through my apprenticeship at this point.
And this is a job.
This is a full-time music job, yeah. So I had the dreadful scenario where I had to go home and face the parents and tell them that this had happened. Not say that I'm doing it, but leave them to decide which is a horrible thing to do, to decide whether I should do this or not.
And they wouldn't have been able to talk you out of it, I don't think. Did they try?
No, I think if my mother if her face had fallen the same way my father's face had fallen, I think I'd have had no chance of joining the band. I said to them, I said, this decision, I would love to do it, but if you want me to carry on the apprenticeship, I'll do it. But the day I finish the apprenticeship, I'll leave.
Okay. But your mum knew?
My mum said, follow your heart.
She knew?
She knew.
Why?
She could see it in my eyes.
Mums are different from dads sometimes.
They are.
Because mums, especially this generation, they kind of gave up on any dreams they had very, very early, and consciously and deliberately, rather than perhaps the slow grind of disappointment that our dads could have had. Mums kind of had a slightly more romantic relationship with dreams, maybe.
I think so, and I think possibly the dreams that mums had then, and this is going to sound dreadful, was to get married. It was to get married young and have a family and the security and all of that. Their mindset wasn't on a career. Their career was being a mum. So I think she was maybe more exposed to me singing around the house and,
so she had
drones and guitars everywhere.
So she had faith. So not she knew you, but she also had faith in.
I think she had faith in my ability to maybe pull it off or give it a damn good try.
And how heavy was that burden? How heavy was the fear of failure then, given the way your dad's face fell that day?
It wasn't, I have to say. It was like, it was the moment in The Wizard of Oz where Dorothy moves from black and white to colour.
Oh, wow. Really?
All of a sudden this door opened up and I'd wake up in the morning thinking, I'm going into rehearsals today.
Yeah.
I mean, this isn't a job. It wasn't a job. So you'd go in and you'd learn some of the songs from the top 40 because that's what you were. You were the human jukebox. And that was it. Eked away by the dangling carrot of £25 a week, which I didn't see for a long, long time.
Sure, but still, I mean, it happened. Quite bits of it happened very quickly because you become the singer very quickly in
After
the
a
band.
year or so, yeah.
And then the band Salvation becomes Slik, and you're working with proper pop stars by now. You've got a couple of Bay City Rollers writing songs for you.
A couple of the guys who wrote the
They're
Bay City
writers.
Rollers.
Okay, so that's
the
Bill
writers
Martin and
producers,
Phil
Bill Martin
Coulter,
and Phil
yeah.
Coulter. Yeah, they wrote Forever and Ever. Which
So are you flying now? Are you? I mean, you're flapping your wings, but you're still not taking off in your own mind.
I'm in a car, but I'm not behind the steering wheel.
Okay,
and it's an odd thing when the chart rundown it used to happen on a Sunday on the radio, and you'd hear the chart rundown of where the positions were that week, what was number one, and the people in the industry get to know the chart position a couple of hours beforehand. And I got a phone call to tell us that Slik was number one. And I
this is Forever and Ever.
This Forever and Ever, and I might as well be dead. I felt nothing.
Why?
It wasn't mine. We had turned up to make this record.
Okay.
From Glasgow.
So you're a boy band, effectively, in a sense, a package.
Just been turned into the new Bay City Rollers.
Right.
And we had turned up to make this record, and as I walked in, I heard the strains of the backing track being played already.
Yeah.
The session guys had been in and knocked it off that morning.
So it's nothing to do
So all
with
I
you.
did was sing on it.
Right.
So it was nothing to do
say
with
it's
me.
all I did. I mean, it's still. I mean, but it just didn't feel like you, yours.
Not at all. It felt very strange.
We've skipped a bit. That I didn't know, which was the year before you had this number one. You turned down the chance to be, and I did a double take when I read this, to be the lead vocalist of the Sex Pistols.
If it was lead vocalist.
Yeah.
I'll never know.
Right, but Malcolm McLaren made you an offer you could refuse.
I did refuse, yeah. I mean, the reality is, I was coming out of Glasgow, a music shop in Glasgow.
Yeah.
And back in the day, our management at that point owned what became the Glasgow Apollo.
Right.
The big venue there. And when bands would come to the Glasgow Apollo and find that their amplifiers weren't working or whatever, you couldn't just call up a rental company and have something delivered to replace it. They didn't exist. So they used to send people round to McCormack's, the Glasgow guitar shop, and say, Midge will be there. He's always there. He's always trading and buying guitars and doing whatever. And I thought this English guy stopping me coming out of the shop was about this. He said,
an amplifier?
Looking to borrow a guitar or something, And the guy who stopped me turned out to be Bernie Rhodes, who went on to manage The Clash. And his friend round the corner, sitting in his beat-up old Cortina or whatever, was Malcolm McLaren, who was a very odd sight to behold in Glasgow in 1975 or whatever. And he proceeded to tell me about his shop in Vivian Westwood, and he used to look after the New York Dolls or something for a while. And said he was putting a band together. And after half an hour telling me this stuff, he said, do you want to join? But he hadn't asked me what I did. He didn't even ask if I was a musician. They stopped me because I'd kind of James Dean quiff, and didn't look like everybody else in Glasgow at the time. So I turned around the Pistols, and why they were there was funny enough. And I told Steve Jones, the guitarist of the Pistols, this a couple of years ago on his radio show. Why they were in Glasgow was that they'd driven from London and stopped at every major city to try and sell some slightly hot equipment from their boot. And they'd made it to Glasgow and they still had some bits. So I turned down the Pistols, but I bought an amplifier. and Jones said, "The bastards! I stole that."
That's fantastic. They got
they stole his stuff.
This makes sense then. So the number one meant absolutely nothing. You turned down in '76 that whatever that job would have been. And to be fair, I mean, history records that your musical ability wouldn't necessarily have been particularly.
Also, to be fair to Malcolm McLaren, he chose the right guys.
He knew what he was doing
together.
Yeah. But then what? So PVC2 is born of frustration at what you've just described, which is what Slik became.
We left the record label. We left the production company. We couldn't stand any more Bill Martin and Phil Coulter songs. They wrote a song called "The Kids Are Punk." As a kind of homage to this exploding new wave scene, which was dreadful. The opening line was, "Hey, hey, hear what they say. He looks just like James Dean." Yeah. The end. That was it. So we walked away from the contract and carried on for a little bit. PVC2 was a live recorded cassette, a tape that we did in a rehearsal room and put the record out. And it became one of the biggest records that Zoom Records ever had in Edinburgh, just when the new wave thing was exploding and little independent labels started appearing.
Okay. So, I mean, when did you become Midge then? Because we've jumped over that.
We have jumped over that. When I joined Salvation, after they asked me to join the band, and my mum had said that, and I went off to join the band. It was run by two brothers, Jim and Kevin McGinley, and my name's Jim, James, same as yours, and Jim McGinley, who was infinitely older than I was, maybe 2 years older than me, said in his infinite wisdom, we can't have two Jims in the band because it'll be too confusing. So you are now Midge, which is Jim reversed.
Of course, right. Oh,
That's
yeah. So it came out and it stuck, obviously.
Yeah, you don't ask for these things.
No, you don't. The move to London now, when you've hooked up with Glenn Matlock, this is Rich Kids, began happening for you quite quickly, the new wave stuff you part of, but in 78... that's when you set up Visage with Rusty Egan. This is where I opened the interview by pointing out just how many different branches there would be on your rock family tree. Why did you jump around so much? I
didn't jump around. It was
is that not right?
the Glenn Matlock thing was pure luck. I was washed up. I was finished at that point. I was tarred with the teeny bop brush,
right?
And I thought it was never going to happen again. I thought that was my moment done. It was over. My 15 minutes was gone.
And you hadn't even enjoyed them.
And I hadn't enjoyed it. It hadn't been my 15 minutes.
No.
It was 15 minutes thrust upon me. And I got the call from Glenn to come down, who was looking for the final member for his band, the Rich Kids.
Right.
And it came from a music journalist, Caroline Kuhn, who used to write for Melody Maker. And she had seen Slik perform. And she had said to Glenn, he's the guy you need for your band.
Wow.
It was amazing,
Yeah.
So I came to London and learned 3 songs that afternoon. And we went out that evening and opened up for The Police, whose support band didn't turn up. We did that in Angel Islington. We went to a warehouse party I met the Clash, and everyone I'd read about in music papers were all there. So we did 3 gigs that night, and it was baptism by fire. It was absolutely amazing. So it felt buzzy and exciting, and still not mine. It was Glenn's band.
Right.
I was part of this thing. I was getting pulled along in his coattails in a way. But it was exciting, and it was a lifeline that had just been thrown out to me.
But also the first time you felt that you were actually in the world that you'd always wanted to be in.
First time that I felt that I was contributing something. I'd started writing songs at this point.
Okay.
And I had my space. I had my platform to do it. And then I kind of screwed it all up by introducing a synthesizer into the band.
Why did that screw it all up? Because
half the band hated it.
Right.
I decided.
Why did you? I mean, because obviously history has proved you right about the influence that the synthesizer would have on popular music. What did you like about it?
I loved the idea that this thing was infinite. You could create sounds until the day you pop your clogs, and they would never be the same. It's as limited as your imagination, and of course, there were bands using synthesizers at the time. The Beatles used synthesizers, and the Kraftwerk had been using them for a long time. Excessive use of synthesizers. But there was something about the idea of incorporating rock instrumentation with this new technology, and I thought that this would be a great fit within the Rich Kids, and of course. It was like an extension of the punk days when bands would form. Guys would put bands together. They learned 3 chords, and that's all they needed to know. They didn't have to be the best musicians in the world. This was the same thing, but with technology. I couldn't play a keyboard. I didn't know what I was doing, but I could make noises, and I could figure out what the chords.
I never thought of that before. The synthesizer was the most punk instrument imaginable.
It was the electronic punk instrument.
Never thought of that before.
So a lot of the guys who had formed punk bands did exactly the same thing. They started making records in their bedrooms on a tape recorder. The Human League's Being Boiled, one of the best electronic songs ever, was made with one synthesizer and a tape machine.
And so the next bit doesn't make sense to me then. So I can see how you'd leave the Rich Kids, you and Rusty Egan set up Visage. Why do you bring in a new lead vocalist? Why did you bring in a lead vocalist when you were so desperate for everything to be yours?
Yeah, that's a bit of an oddity, isn't it? I wanted to be a producer at this point. I
Okay.
wanted to learn more about how you glued all this stuff together. And I'd already started producing stuff in the studio during the Rich Kids. And
Okay.
and this seemed like a perfect vehicle. This synthesizer that killed the band. I found out that at the end of the Rich Kids, we'd been allocated some demo recording time by EMI. So I took my quarter of the recording time, went in with Rusty, and recorded the first 2 or 3 Visage tracks, what would become Visage.
Wow.
And it just grew from an idea of Rusty's saying, wouldn't it be great having a band with all our favourite musicians?
Yeah.
One of whom was Billy Currie, keyboard player in Ultravox.
Gosh. And Steve Strange comes in as the vocalist.
Steve was a friend of Rusty's, who'd already been in a punk band, and he was flamboyant and outrageous and just made a great frontman. It was always going to be a studio project.
Okay.
And Steve would be the face of the studio project.
And chart success followed fairly quickly on that. But you were hitting the road again not long after, by the time the second album came out.
Yeah. I was
because now you did want your own baby, or
no? Now the opportunity arose because the Visage project, we didn't have any funding for it,
right?
So we would beg, borrow, and steal studio time. And a producer named Martin Rushent, who had been producing the Stranglers, heard our initial demos. In fact, put the first single out, I think, of Visage, and he gave us some studio time at his. He was building a new studio. And he said, but all my equipment's in a hut at the bottom of the garden. He said, if you plug it all up, you can use that.
Oh, wow.
So we plugged it all up and figured out how it all worked. And he used to come down to the studio every night and hear what we were doing. Then went off and produced the Don't You Want Me Baby for Human League.
Yeah.
He got it all.
Oh,
so
wow.
this took a long time to do Visage because the members were in different bands, and they were all in touring bands. The Rich Kids were still in existence at this point. Ultravox were very much a touring band, although coming towards the end of that life.
Yeah.
And the band Magazine, where another couple of the musicians came from, they were a touring band as well. So it took over the space of maybe about 6 months to a year to get the Visage stuff done, by which point Ultravox came back from an American tour without their singer and guitarist, to find that they've been dropped by the record label.
Where are we now? Late 78?
Yes.
So we've skipped the bit where you went on tour with Thin Lizzy, haven't we?
No, you're coming up to that.
We're coming up to that.
I think you're coming up to that point.
And we're going to run out of time before we get to, because I always like to, we usually end when we get to the bit where most people listening will know what happens next. I don't think we're quite there yet, because so Visage sort of falls apart, does it? Or
no.
So
Visage,
you just walk away.
I walked away after the second album. I'd done the production thing. I joined Ultravox, although nobody was particularly interested in that. During the finishing touches to the first Visage album, that was when the Thin Lizzy thing happened.
Okay.
I was already a member of Ultravox.
Was that your first big international touring experience?
My first ever experience in America.
So have you relaxed yet? Have you allowed yourself to feel yes yet, or are you still thinking this isn't quite? No, you're a perfectionist, aren't you?
I'm not sure. Probably.
Yeah. But not just in terms of putting the music together. You're a perfectionist in terms of this isn't quite perfect yet. I'm on tour with one of the biggest bands in the world at the time. I've had a #1 record. I bet it isn't quite right yet. It isn't quite. I'm going to tweak this, and that's why you wanted to be a producer. I'm going to turn this knob, and I'm going to turn that, and I'm going to push.
Freak.
Well, I know. I prefer perfectionist.
Okay,
I prefer perfectionist.
You know what? It was funny. Doing the Thin Lizzy thing, of course, it was at the height that I dreamed of. Of course, it's fabulous. It wasn't my band.
No, I know.
But the thing that kept me warm and cozy was that I'd joined Ultravox, and that was my home. Okay. That was it. I'd found the right door to walk through.
Why? So Billy Currie would be a big part of it, I think, and the fact that you were writing now.
Yep.
You became the lead vocalist pretty quickly. Or immediately?
Immediately.
Because John Fox had gone.
John had gone, yeah.
So this is the first time you thought you're writing, you're playing, you're singing, keyboards and guitar. This is it now. This is
Yeah.
So Thin Lizzy was always a stopgap, even though you were writing. You co-wrote Yellow Pearl. I mean, but then when you get back 79, now I'm flying, or now I'm on the runway. I'm taxiing up the runway.
I think there's an element of yes. I'd found my musical home.
Okay.
You know, I'd found these guys who were experimental. I'd found something that might never have been commercially successful.
Okay.
Which was the antithesis of Slik.
Yeah. Okay.
Where I was doing my thing and I could be responsible for it, and I could take the punch in the chin if people hated it.
Yeah.
You know, it was mine to own or disown.
Yeah.
So it was my decision at that point. But I was with a crowd of people who helped me do this. And I felt safe in that environment musically. And I could experiment. So the idea of, you know, writing Vienna, I mean, it's all right looking at it now and going, yeah, it was a hit record. It wasn't when we did it. It was the antithesis of a hit record. It was too long and too slow and too fast, and it speeds up, and it's got a viola solo, and it's got synthesizers and drum machines, and it was an oddity. But it felt okay doing that. And I think possibly, is that me looking for a pat in the back? Is that me looking for recognition? I really don't know. But it felt right. So despite, you know, the flying from city to city or going out on Concorde to go and join Thin Lizzy, despite all of that loveliness that brought, and getting a peek of what the American music scene was like at the end of the 70s, because it was about to change radically, seeing all that, my heart was about going back home and getting on with finishing the Vienna album.
Wow. And commercial success followed.
It followed, but again, it's
not immediate. We should stress, because we've been here, we've only got about 10 minutes left. And some people listening to this might think that by now you're about 45, given the amount of territory that we've covered in the court, but you're only 26, 27 by about this point in proceedings. Yeah. But Ultravox obviously is, you know, part of the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame. Ultravox is the bit that everybody knows before we get onto your solo stuff and Band-Aid. But this is it now. You're there.
I'm there.
It's happening.
Absolutely.
And the album didn't go bonkers, but it did enough. And then the single, when Vienna came out as a single in January 81,
changed everything. Everything.
All this is. I mean, if Dorothy turned into colour back when you joined Salvation, how do you describe this?
Oh, this was Technicolor. This was widescreen.
This was everything. IMAX.
This was HD.
It was 3D.
Absolutely. This was sense around as well. It was mega. It was. You know, it felt like you'd been swimming upstream, trying to do this, and all of a sudden the stream had turned and started following you, and it was just an amazing feeling. You know, I'd been given the toys, the keys to the toy box, the keys to the musical kingdom, and I was using them. You know, I was producing, when all this was happening, I was still doing Visage, and I was still producing other artists, and I was directing videos for other people, and, you know, all of that stuff. It was like an explosion of creativity for me. It was just incredible.
In terms of your life, the next truly seminal thing to happen is when you're rehearsing for the Tube with Ultravox, and Paula Yates, the presenter, asks you to speak to her husband at the time, Bob Geldof.
Yeah. Bob had just seen the Michael Buck footage. First time we'd been exposed to what was going on in Ethiopia at the time, and was incensed. And I'd known Bob and Paula for quite a while, and he said, "I want to do something. The Rats aren't in a position to do it. You know, we've had a day. We're not big enough to pull something off. I want to generate some income. Can we talk about this? Will you help?" So we met up. We talked about it, and came to the blaringly obvious conclusion that we're rubbish at everything except maybe putting a song together. And we quite coldly decided that based on an artist royalty that you would get from a record label, if we wrote a Christmas song, because you couldn't just cover a standard Christmas song, because 50% of the money generated from that goes to the songwriters. So if we wrote something Christmassy, got it in the charts and got it to #1 over Christmas, New Year, the charts freeze, and you know your Auntie Mary or whatever would buy a copy of the record and give it to someone for Christmas. So you sell twice as many. So it was quite cold.
Yeah.
So I went home from this meeting and I I came up with the da 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 thing on a little keyboard.
Did you know it was good?
I knew it was Christmassy. It was on a bell sound.
Okay.
So that's Christmas.
Fair
It was a
enough.
little jingle bell sound on a toy keyboard. And I sent it to Bob, who hated it. And he said it sounded like Z Cars. You know, it was a classic Ultravox tune.
Yes, it was. Yeah. Very much so.
You know.
Yes.
And he came to mine a day later with a 12-string guitar, because he's left-handed but plays it upside down, and sang what he had come with, which transpired it was a track that the Boomtown Rats thought was rubbish.
Okay.
And he hadn't done anything with it. And every time he sang, it was different. So I had just built a studio in the bottom of my garden, my own toys.
This is in Chiswick.
In Chiswick, yeah.
Because I saw that studio in an estate agent's details quite recently, and
yes,
they were still trying to resell it several years after you moved on.
Yeah, it's now worth more money than I've ever made. So yeah, I did. I spent 4 days putting these ideas together, and layering all the tracks. I played all the instruments on the thing and whatever. And Bob went off and bludgeoned everyone into coming along, because we didn't necessarily need their voices, we needed their following.
Of course.
You know, you need their hardcore fans to buy this, to make it work.
And then, I mean, the phrase "beyond everybody's wildest dreams" doesn't even come close to what followed, culminating in Live Aid. And you were heavily involved in that as well.
Still am.
Yeah.
It was going to be a 6-month project. That's 40 years this year.
And you've spoken a bit about how perhaps this experience was so profound that going back to Ultravox didn't quite feel, or at least going back to Ultravox with those levels of enthusiasm sustained.
Yeah, things have a finite life.
Yeah,
I think, and because I mean, the last thing Ultravox did as Ultravox, I think, was Live Aid, and then when we did get back together again, maybe a year or so after, because everything I was doing, I was working on a solo record at the time, and all of that was shelved to do the Band Aid project and the Live Aid project and whatever. So I went back to that and did a world tour on my own with my own record
with the Gift.
With the Gift, yeah. And I had a fairly good time doing it. But by the time I got back to Ultravox, like any relationship, any marriage, you know, you leave your partner for 2 years and then you come back and you expect it to be the same. It's not going to happen. So it's a more complex relationship than that. You've got 3 other people who've all been doing different things, who are all waiting on you coming back so they can get on with life. And when I got back, it wasn't the same. And it's obviously not going to be the same, but maybe I hadn't anticipated that. I'd come back, I'd worked with the Chieftain, I'd worked with Mark King from Level 42, I'd worked with Mick Karn from Japan, I'd done a duet with Kate Bush, I'd done all this fabulous stuff, and I'm thinking, wow, I'm stretching my musical muscles here, this is great. But when I got back to the band, it wasn't the same, and we were pulling in different directions.
And so again, it's not so much back to the drawing board, because you had the solo career up and running. The Gift was very, very successful. If I Was a massive hit. That was a number 1 that I presume you did enjoy.
I did. That was quite fun having that. Yeah, that was a number 1 with a gold star.
Yes, and you'd bloody earned it really. By this point, there's a tricky period coming up, which we won't have time to talk about in particular depth. But I think by the time Breathe came out, somehow there's a feeling the moment had passed. Is there? And that despite the things you've just listed very casually, the people that you'd worked with and the achievements that you'd made, a sense that the spotlight had almost moved on a bit.
Oh, very much so.
Which you struggled to deal with.
I did struggle to deal with it. You know, I was drinking heavily, and I shouldn't have been. You know, I was never a drinker in my youth, but it was my.
You lost your dad around.
I'd lost my dad around that point, and that was the
How proud was he of you when it all became? I mean, did he ever fully understand what you were?
No. The one thing he did understand is when they did This Is Your Life on me, because he had seen, you know, Danny Blanchflower or whoever. He had seen footballers getting this done and movie stars having it done. And
now it's Hard James.
He was there, and that's wee Jim there. So he was Big Jim, I was wee Jim.
Yeah.
And so he saw that, and he got that. He didn't understand the trinkets and the cars and all that stuff.
Sure. But he knew.
He did. He got it.
you've come through that trickier period now. You found fulfillment both in what you do and in what you have done, which brings us to the new tour, which I presume covers everything we've just talked about.
It doesn't go back as far as Slik. I can't quite.
You're not going to do that one, then. You're not going to
go there. No,
fair enough.
I'm not going to go there. But I'm looking at. I've called it Catalogue because that's what it is. It's a canon of.
And you've already used collection as well. So.
I've used collection. I'm running out of C's. The next one will be crap. There we go. I can go back as far as the Rich Kids. It expands my repertoire a little bit.
Yes.
Obviously, you've got to play the hits because 50% of the audience who come and see you,
of course,
don't really want to be there because they've been dragged along by the significant other half. So you have to think, well, they only know the handful of songs that have been played on the radio. So you have to try and balance it where you're covering what you need to do as an artist.
But also, you like playing the songs that people love.
Playing the songs, of course.
And what's it like on stage now? I mean, but is the magic the same as it was? Are there elements of it that feel almost as special to you as singing at school as a kid, or singing with the Cubs, or singing?
It's never gone away.
Is it not?
No.
It's all there.
Well, you know what it's like.
I do. A bit.
No, hold on. You guys are the rock stars of the radio.
Yeah.
So you've experienced that live thing and standing there.
Yeah.
And if you stand at the side of the stage before you walk on and you don't have that buzz, something is seriously wrong. And I still have the buzz.
And yet you're on the road 12th of November, opening in Bath. I
am, and finishing in Glasgow. So that's my adopted home, and Glasgow my home, of course.
You can get tickets for this at midgeure.co.uk. You celebrated your 70th birthday at the Royal Albert Hall last October, and this is a kind of 50-year retrospective.
It is, and it's funny because maybe that's just is that just something to hang it on? You used to go out on tour to promote a new album.
Yeah. It doesn't work
when
like that.
Yeah, in the middle of playing all your hits, when you say, and here's something new, you can hear the tumbleweed roll through the audience. They don't really want to hear it.
Are you still writing though? Do you still?
I am. I constantly. I just take my time now.
And now that you've got a kind of sense of completeness, or at least a sense of fulfillment, and I know you've spoken a lot about how family has come to mean everything to you, and is by far the most important element of your existence. Do you feel that you've done it all? Do you feel now that these is not a lap of honour, so to speak, this tour, but it's I've earned this. I'm not reaching for something else. I'm not tweaking that thing to make it perfect. This is me. This is what I've done, and I'm going to really, really enjoy this tour.
I think as you get older, the fear of what other people think disappears.
Yeah.
And it's not as important anymore. I'm constantly asked by younger musicians for advice.
Yes.
And I just tell them, don't believe anything that's ever written or said about you, because if it's great, it's not real. If it's dreadful, it's not real. And I think that's what that is. The idea of going out and still doing it because I still love doing it and people still want to see it and hear it, thank goodness. I do have to pinch myself and remind myself that when I was a kid walking around Cambuslang in my shorts, I wasn't just dreaming of Beatle boots and a guitar. Yeah. I was dreaming of having a life that I've had. And I'm one of the lucky ones who got it. It's a very short-lived industry, the music industry. And I have somehow managed to ebb and flow and not sell my soul to the DJs and let them remix all my songs.
No, absolutely. And we haven't touched on, final question really, you never had formal ambition in the sense of I want this and I want that and I want this, because when you got a number one record, it turned out you didn't want it in those circumstances. So there was never a sort of checklist of achievement. Is there anything you haven't done that you'd still like to do?
You know what? I've never planned anything.
No,
none of
I
it.
sense that.
It's not like it's not a path that I'd ever dreamed of going on. You couldn't. It's a Hollywood script, isn't it? It's someone else's life. I'm a Walter Mitty who's actually done it, which is weird.
Yes.
So I don't have the next box to tick.
No.
But when it happens, and it'll be interesting. And I'll only tick the box if it's something that I really want to do.
I look forward to it. I need to tell you something funny, which is why I love Ultravox. Okay. So I think it was my 13th birthday, and Dad said I could have 2 albums. I'd just got a new tape recorder. And my musical experience at the time was very, very limited, but beyond what was on the charts. I didn't know anything. So he took me to W.H. Smith, and I was allowed to pick 2 albums. So I picked the 2 albums that had the most songs on them. I picked Give My Regards to Broad Street by Paul McCartney, and I picked The Collection by Ultravox, and it's still on my Spotify roundup of. It's still on my most played albums of the year.
I'm not worthy. Thank you.
The Midge Ure, thank you.